Well, you've heard of Made in America. How about Owned in America? Would you be shocked to find out that the planes you fly in and even your local movie theater may be owned by the Chinese?
And we could be seeing a lot more Chinese firms buying out U.S. companies. Critics say it's a red flag. But why?
NBC Bay Area's Stephanie Trong has a story new at 11.
Well, think back to the 1980s, and you may remember the wary American attitude was directed at the Japanese, who had bought American icons like Rockefeller Center and Columbia Records. Well, some experts say now that's directed at the Chinese, and they believe as the number of U.S. companies sold to Chinese investors grows, so will the distrust toward China. A mother who says she was forced into an abortion, 6 months pregnant. Accusations of Chinese spies trying to hack their way into Intel, the technology behind U.S. military drones. And now, the world's largest pork producer, U.S. company Smithfield, bought by Shuanghui, a Chinese company forced to apologize 2 years ago after Chinese media reported a subsidiary bought pigs tainted with an illegal additive, one potentially fatal if consumed. Human rights, espionage, and food safety. Headlines that have pushed some Americans to either stay or grow more wary of China and the Chinese.
That's the way those who are xenophobic thinks. Anything coming from China must be bad. And it must be because the government is behind it.
George Koo began advising U.S. companies in China in 1978 and retired in 2008 after working for Deloitte. He warns American political leaders and the people are worried about the wrong thing.
The flip side is when China and Japan and others loses total confidence in the American dollar and refuse to buy any more Treasury bonds. Boy, are we going to be in trouble then.
The Chinese alone own roughly $1.3 trillion in U.S. Treasury bonds. And 2012 was a banner year for Chinese investors who spent $6.7 billion in direct U.S. investments. And this year, on pace to surpass that at $4.7 billion so far. These acquisitions, including AMC Theaters, Volvo, electric battery manufacturer A123 Systems, multiple energy companies like Chesapeake, and of course now Smithfield, which Koo acknowledges has prompted worries that tainted food could flood the American market.
They're not going to try to get Smithfield to taint their food. That's ridiculous.
A Smithfield spokesperson says the acquisition will have no impact on operations and there will be no importing of food from China into the U.S. She also pointed to an expansion in jobs, adding to the current 400 hog farms and 2,000 family farmers across America who work with Smithfield. And a job is exactly what Corey Grenier got after posting this resume video online. But he didn't land in Silicon Valley, where he grew up.
Zhongguancun, and then Shangdi.
He ended up in China for 8 years.
When I got there, it said, "Welcome to China's Silicon Valley,"
where the San Jose State graduate worked for Lenovo, which had just acquired IBM's PC division in 2005. Grenier says he was apprehensive about Chinese culture and clash. But despite having to sleep in a metal bunk bed in his work dorm, he describes it as an eye-opener for an American working for a Chinese company.
The apprehension of China stems from the heightened competitiveness of the country and so many jobs migrating overseas, and China's become the scapegoat as a whole.
Huawei has been demonized thoroughly.
The world's largest telecommunications equipment producer tried to buy a minority stake in 3Com, but the deal fell through when Washington pressure mounted in 2008, with concerns that Huawei's ties to the Chinese military would hurt U.S. national security interests.
The consequence is that 3Com is completely gone. So here was a chance where he could have saved some American jobs if the investment was allowed.
Hewlett-Packard would go on to acquire 3Com in 2010.
Those are all real problems.
Koo admits the Chinese government is far from perfect.
You criticize China for corruption, you won't hear any rebuttal from me.
But says right now Americans only have room to worry about one government, their own.
Our own source of corruption. How money corrupts all the political campaigns, that should be a concern to us.
Now, while the U.S. invested more than $50 billion in China last year, China only invested 10% of that in 2012 in the U.S., $5 billion. Looking forward, it's estimated that China could invest more than $1 trillion around the world during the next decade. The question now is, how much will come here to the U.S.? Stephanie Trong, NBC.